Thank you for your patience. Very good evening to all of you who have joined in today. I hope that today at the end of this event, you'd be taking something back and you'd be motivated to lead the life of a software engineer and tread down that career path. Today's event, Become a Software Engineer, Learn the Skills to Build Your Dreams, is an event in which our speaker, who I'll introduce in a while, will take you through the journey of how software engineering, how and why software engineering is important in the industry today, and what you need to do in order to become a software engineer. Right? Now, very good evening to all of you and those who are joining in. Software engineering is important in the industry. You've heard this from a lot of folks around you. But why is this so? Have you thought about it yourself? Right? Now, software is a key critical component of many products and services. All of you watch Netflix, all of you watch YouTube, you're browsing various applications on your phone. All of these have come about as a result of software engineers developing them and making them successful. So software engineers are responsible for the whole software development lifecycle, where they design, develop, and maintain software applications. Any industry you take today, be it finance, healthcare, logistics, manufacturing, and many others, require skilled software engineers to build applications, be it on the web or mobile. And one of the biggest challenges is that in this fast-paced digital world, especially after the COVID era where things have been accelerated so much, building software applications have become very, very important. And the turnaround time to build these applications are also required to be very fast. Hence, the need to have skilled software engineers in the market today. Now, in order to tell you more about why software engineering is a critical skill and why skilled software engineers are required in the market today, in organizations today, we have an esteemed speaker amongst us. Mr. Desmond Sek is the co-founder and chief architect of Xaltius Private Limited, a Singapore-based organization specializing in training and education and development of software applications. Mr. Desmond comes with a huge background in software engineering, coupled with the modern digital architecture and data that is required in the industry today. And he brings with him numerous years of experience to the table. And it's a pleasure having him on board today and imparting his skills to you and telling you why this is the path that you need to go down. So Mr. Desmond Sek, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
All right. Can you hear me? Good. All right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Aditya, for introducing me, right? And I'm humbled, right, to be able to share with everyone just a little bit more as to, why, right, you should come and become a software engineer, right? So you would want to learn some of the skills, right, to be able to build your dreams. So firstly, I'd like to welcome you, right, to software engineering, right? So this is the world of software engineering, right? And I would like you to get a little bit of a glimpse, right? And get a round understanding, right? Or wholesome understanding of what are some of the things that you would have to pick up, right, in software engineering itself. Okay, it is not necessary, right, that it's going to be very difficult. Neither is it going to be very easy as well, but firstly, I'd like to welcome you and hopefully take you on this journey, right, for you to be able to gain just a little bit more understanding. Okay, so we want to start off a little bit more as to why, right, software engineering. So as part of our agenda, we will be trying to figure that out, right? Post that, we want to learn, what to learn, right, in software engineering itself. Okay, and how can you prepare yourself, right, to take up, right, this thing called software engineering. And what can you do, right, after you have learned, right, software engineering? Okay, I'm going to be repeating myself, right, in terms of the word software engineering quite a fair bit, right, across the next 40 minutes plus or so. Okay, but I just do beg your pardon, right, if you do hear me speak it too much. Okay, so we want to start, right, by first, right, addressing, right, this thing called technology, right? We are surrounded, right, by it, right? So technology is something that you are sitting in front of your phone, you're sitting in front of your PC, right? We are actually surrounded by it. So it is wonderful, right? It is magnificent. We are the age, right, of information, right? This is the information age. So we are, at a point whereby whatever technology or whatever information you want, right, is really at your fingertips itself. Okay, so now, who are these people that build this technology, right? And all this nice interface that we do see around us, right? These people are software engineers itself. So I really want to understand, okay? So the power of technology, okay? So with technology, we mentioned quite a fair bit already, right? You are sitting in a world that is really, really built, right, by a lot of people, engineers, software engineers, and so on. Okay, so now technology has been used to leverage quite a fair number of things, right? It is used to solve problems, right, and help us to improve efficiency and help us to essentially create new opportunities as well. So now, what are some of them, right? You would start to think, right? Later, I'll bring up some examples as to what some of these problems that technology, right, has helped us to solve. Okay, so from here, we then want to figure out how can these skills that we learn, right, help us to unlock for you, yourself, right, this potential, right, to be able to harness this technology. So my assumption is for everyone who has come on board, right, to listen in today, right, you have probably a keen understanding, right, of making use of technology, but you are probably at a loss as well. How do I get started, right? How do I, become that software engineer? Okay, so now it is said that for software engineer to be good, you always want to start with being lazy. Now, what does it mean to be lazy? Right, I'll give you this example over here. Right, so this lady says, I have to do this boring task. Right, it takes 10 minutes for me to do it. So now if I'm a software engineer, I'll say, oh, don't worry about it, right? I'll just automate it for you, right? And just give me 10 hours. So the idea here is this, right? If I'm a software engineer, I'll be lazy to repeat this task, 10-minute task, every single day for 365 days a year, for example, right? I'll just spend 10 hours, fix the problem, and then from there onwards, it's just going to be a 2-second thing. Okay, so software engineers are lazy, like so. They don't want to spend that 365 days, right, doing that 10 minutes. Okay, so hopefully you are a little bit of a lazy person as well, right? And you want to make sure that you can take advantage of software engineering to help overcome this problem. So software engineering, right, is the future. Okay. So what do we mean by saying that it is the future? So like I mentioned, it's permeating every industry and every aspect of our lives. Okay, software engineering, right, is in our mobile phones, right, in the form of apps, right, and tablets as well. So if you do own an iPad, right, there'll be apps as well. Okay, and in your computer when you're visiting websites, okay, there's millions, trillions, probably billions of websites out there. Okay, so websites are created. What about smart TV applications as well? So probably you would have accessed, right, Netflix, right, or something, right, using your smart TV. What about car entertainment system itself? Okay, a car entertainment system, okay, is a form of an app as well. So this software, right, is everywhere. Okay, so you can't really escape it as well. So software engineering skills, to create the world that's around us in this information age, right, it is really becoming increasingly valuable, right, and in demand, right, at the same time. Okay, so now in saying that, obviously it's just not only for the future, right? Software engineering skills, right, is actually for the not just for the present, right? It's also for the future as well. Okay, it is essential for you, right, to try to think, right, how can you pick it up, right, and how can you learn it, right, to set yourself up for success, right, in the future, right? Because technology is changing really fast, right? Later we talk a little bit more about what some of the upcoming technologies, right, that you may encounter. Okay, but as it changes really fast, right, software engineering really helps you to keep pace with these changes. Now, with software engineering, it helps us actually with the potential for innovation as well. So what do I mean by that? Right, software engineering skills can empower individuals to create innovative solutions, products, and services. Okay, there are many out there, right? We can take a look at some of them in a bit. Okay, but a lot of it, right, always have the ability to potentially disrupt industries and change the world. Okay, I'll give you a few examples of what some of them are. Facebook, right, for example, is a application that has changed the world, right? For this application that came out, well, some time ago, maybe 2004, 2006, right? He has come up, and we have all jumped on board the bandwagon. Maybe not 2006, okay, but long time back, okay, and all of us are connected, right, into the social media system. Okay, so it has really changed the world. And a lot of people whom are first encountering the internet, right, could potentially be joining Facebook and then think that Facebook is the internet, okay, but obviously not, okay. It's just that Facebook has become such a pervasive tool, right, for us to access the internet, and it is something that has really, really changed the world. So now, for you itself, why does it matter? Okay, why does it matter? So you could be someone who potentially, enjoy creating things, enjoy solving problems, okay, and you are a little bit creative as well. So, if you are, someone who does that, okay, obviously software engineering, right, could help you with a little bit of that as well. So the joy of creating, okay. Software engineers are creative, like what we mentioned just now. So if you like to solve a problem, right, that is, takes 10 minutes to do every single day, and you want to solve it using 10 hours, you got to bring something creative, right, in order for you to fix it. So you got to think, how can I, achieve the same steps that I require in 10 minutes, and use a PC to help me solve the problem itself. So it is actually an immensely fulfilling field, for the reason that the moment you create it, right, and you see in action, right, it actually is something that is, say, wow, okay, I've done something that is actually quite useful, right? So you want to bring your ideas to life, and you get to see real results. So apps, right, creation of automation software, right, and software engineers do all of it. Now, you will always think that, okay, great. So Desmond is telling me, I can do X, Y, Z, right? I can do A, B, C. Now, how do I go about doing it, right? So you will think that, oh no, software engineering is too difficult. It is something that I cannot begin to even fathom, right? How do I pick it up? So where do you get started, right? So maybe you want to say, right, yes, right, I want to pick it up, but I don't know how to pick it up. And then, sometimes you just stop trying. Okay, but if you say, okay, maybe I really want to try, that's why you're attending this session here with me. So I'm just going to tell you and say, just get started. Okay, so now post that, you want to ask me the next question. So how do you get started? Okay, so how do you get started besides just getting started? So, okay, so first you want to understand there are many things that encompasses software engineering. First thing you want to typically ask yourself, what programming language to choose? Then you want to ask yourself the question, front end or back end? Okay, so now if you are seeing front end or back end, these terms for the first time, okay, not to worry, I'll explain just a little bit more about what they are. Okay, and hopefully, you can start to get a sensing of what is it that interests you as well. Okay, so now, before I move on to the next slide, I would like to talk a little bit more about programming language. So what is the word language, right? For you, and you're listening to me, the language that we are speaking is this thing called English. Now, it's pretty straightforward like that. English and programming language, they're almost the same, right? It is a means of communication, and it's a structured way of making sure that the computer understands what you're trying to tell it to do. Just like how, as I'm speaking to you, you're able to understand what I'm saying. Okay, so that is pretty straightforward, right? Programming language, right? So a ways of communicating with the PC, right? And post that, right, you have some sort of front end or back end. So now let's dive deeper, right, and try to understand these two other topics as well. So now let's talk a little bit more about front end. So the typical front-end languages, the basics of them is this thing called HTML, right? Hypertext markup language, right? JavaScript, right? And CSS, cascading style sheets, right? So if you take a look at this little picture I have for you, so HTML is actually the skeleton, right, of a website or a system, okay, not per se, right, a website. So it is the skeleton. It helps us to build the foundations, right? And it helps us to be able, right, to set, okay, do I want a box? Do I want text? Do I want a table, right? What do I want, right? HTML helps us to set that in place. So now if you see JavaScript, right, is actually the meat, right, the muscles, right, to help us to actuate, right, some of these actions, right, to be able to say, all right, now if I click this button, where does it go? If I click this drop down, what will it show? All right, so JavaScript is something that helps us to do that. All right, and finally, CSS is what makes cascading style sheets is what makes, right, your website look nice, look beautiful, right, and looks like it is worth $1 million, right? So CSS is the skin, right, the facial tone, the nice hairstyle that you put on your website itself, right? So now these are actually some of the basic languages that you would pick up. So now they don't constitute the entirety of what you mean to say is front end. All right. There is just a little bit more. Okay, so what is that little bit more? So there's this thing called front end frameworks. Okay, so front end frameworks. So say, oh no, what is this thing, right? Front end frameworks. So front end frameworks is pretty interesting, right? The main idea here is this. Okay, we just don't want to make use of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript only, right? We want to make sure that we have an entire system, right, that can function, right, as a whole, right? We want to have an entire system, right, to be able to talk to our back end. Okay, so having things such as React, Angular, Bootstrap, Vue, and more, right, will help us to be able to do so. So now, you may ask yourself a question, right? So, and I said, and Desmond says, and more, right? Meaning what? There is more things, right? Besides this, this four, right? So maybe then, okay, what should I pick up? So I would always tell people that, okay, if you want to pick up frameworks, right, and you want to be able to understand what some of these frameworks, are most popular, and what some of these frameworks are in terms of effectiveness, you want to take a look at the popularity of them. So this is from last year, a survey done by Stack Overflow. Okay, and we kind of have, right, an idea of what's most popular and what's most in use, right, in terms of building interfaces, right? So we have React on top with 40% of people voting for it, jQuery in second, Express, Angular, Vue, and so on. And the list goes down. Okay, so besides that, obviously, we do have some other languages as well, which we'll take a look at. Okay, so now with backend languages itself, okay, we have a few basic stuff, right? We have Java, we have Python, we have .NET, we have JavaScript, and we have things such as SQL. So SQL, right, is supplementary. It's actually for us to be able to communicate to databases. But I've put it here because it's typical that everyone would add in SQL, to be part of backend itself. When you say that you do backend, the understanding is that you would know some SQL. Later, we take a look at a bigger picture of the whole thing itself. Okay, so what are some of the backend frameworks that are then popular, right? You may ask. Okay, so here we do have it. So in recent years, right, Laravel, right, has been increasingly in popularity. Okay, so in Jan 2023, right, this is increasing popularity in terms of the frameworks itself. So now you may want to talk a little bit more in terms of longevity, right? So the most popular stuff, right, typically have been around for the longest time. So Python would have Django, right? Java would have Spring, right? And even Python would have Flask as well. So some of these, right, frameworks are popular, and I will encourage you to pick up whichever suits you. Okay, and from there onwards, okay, you can go ahead and start to build, right, applications itself, build being a software engineer, your main job really is to build applications, right, and help create, right, stuff. Okay, so now, great. So I've kind of showed you, right, what are some of things that people will pick up in terms of languages, and I have also showed you what are the top things that people would pick up as well. So the pro tip here is this: always pick up stuff, right, that is popular, and always pick up stuff that has been around for a long time, right? Don't pick up stuff that nobody really use. So for example, right, I give you like all the way at the end, we have this thing called code igniter, right? You'll notice it's all the way at the end, right? People are using it, right? Yeah, people have heard of it, okay, but not everyone is using it, right? So always learn the most popular stuff. Now, why would you want to learn the most popular stuff? That is obviously because, right, if you learn the popular stuff, right, more companies, right, are using it, and that really helps you down the line, right, to be able, right, to pick up new jobs as well. Okay. So now let's dive a little bit more, right, into an example. Okay, so say for example, if you were to choose Python, okay, as a beginner, okay, how would you pick it up? Now, if you were to take a look at this, we have the roadmap, right, of Python itself. First, you want to start off typically with the basics of Python. Okay, learning the basics, right? Fundamentally, understand what does it mean, right, to pick up, okay, Python. So how does the language work, right? How does it, what are the syntax, right, inside the language itself? All right. Suppose that you would like to pick up the data structures, right? So data structures, is not just a syntax, but how does our code structure? So it's a little bit like trying to pick up English itself. So if you're trying to pick up English, right, you know how to structure a sentence. Okay. So in Python, it is very much the same thing. Okay. And from there, you like to then understand some of the more complicated stuff. So we have things such as OOP, right, and functional programming. So functional programming is a little bit out of fashion now, right? And for the longest time, a lot of people have been picking up this thing called OOP, right, which is to say object-oriented programming. Here, I would always tell people, right, when you learn OOP, right, it's because Python, right, or at least programming languages are trying to model our world. So our world, right, is made up of objects itself, right? So if you look around you, right, where you're seated, you are listening to me, if you see you have your laptop in front of you, your phone in front of you, what is it? It's an object, right? If you see to the right, is it a cup, right? Is it a bottle, right? Or is it a pen you're writing stuff with, right? Those are objects as well. So our world, right, is made up of objects, right? So Python, right, and programming languages attempt, right, to help us to replicate some of these things as well. Okay, so OOP. Okay. And we do have a few others, right, which is modules and packages. Okay, files and exception handling, right? Important libraries, applications, work on projects, and then you revise. So now there are a few other important things that we could probably talk about, okay, but I shall not spend too much time talking about it because then it'll be a whole session of me trying to teach you Python itself. Okay, but very quickly, okay, modules and packages are things, right? Are packages that have been created by other people, right? So the idea here is when there is a wheel, you do not reinvent the wheel, right? You're trying to just make use of what other people have created. Okay, so from here, right, not just learning the basics of Python. Okay, for you to create applications, you want to pick up some sort of framework, right? For some backend framework, you could pick up Django itself. Okay. Okay, so this is just a little bit off the roadmap, right? In terms of learning itself. Obviously, if you want to find out more, you can do a little bit of Googling, right? And for the specific language that you are trying to pick up, okay, or you could, obviously ask me. Okay, now, in terms of complexity itself, okay, a lot of people would ask the question, which one, right, has most value or which one, right, has most work. Okay, so the most beautiful one is always going to be making use of the front end itself. So the front end, right, very nice, very beautiful, very straightforward. when people see it, they love it, right? Or they hate it, right? Because the colors are no good, right? The animations are terrible. That when you click this button, it doesn't work. Okay, so front end is what users see. Okay, and it's actually quite a fair bit of effort, but it is 20% of the total effort of creating a software application, right? Now, as a software engineer, right, you can decide between both of them, right? Or you can decide on one of them. Now, but let's talk a little bit more about the backend itself. So backend is what users do not see, right? And it's typical for it to be 80%, right, of the total effort. So sometimes, okay, the main idea here is this: you want to have some code which is logical, right, in nature, right, and helps take in business sensing or business requirements and turn it right into hardcore logic, right, in order for business requirements to make sense. Okay, so backend does all of this. So for you, right, you may want to ask yourself the question, which is more interesting for you? Making sure that the backend really works, okay, and the business rules and requirements are adhered to, right, or for the front end, right, to make sure that users, right, have a nice interface to play around with, right, and to make sure that it's just gonna be really beautiful. Okay, so it's really up to you. So now in the middle we have this thing called API, which is thing called application programming interface. Okay, so this is kind of the connective tissue between the front end and the back end. So in recent years, right, we do see a shift, right, between last time they used to call this thing called monolithic architecture, right? Going forward now is API-based architecture, whereby we have a separation between the front end and the back end itself. Okay, so that is a little bit, if you look at it, this is an iceberg. What do you see, and what could it be that is most interesting for you itself? Okay, now as I mentioned, right, you can be someone that takes up and specializes in either one of them, or you can take up the whole thing. Right, if you do take up the whole thing, right, you'll be called this thing called a full stack, all right, software engineer or full stack software developer. Okay, so full stack. So let's have a glimpse, right, of what it means, right, to be full stack itself. So when we talk about full stack, you typically see that there is a wide variety of languages, right, architectures, and even frameworks to learn as well. So for the front end, you'll be picking up things such as React, right, JavaScript, right, Angular, right, for the front end, like I already mentioned. The back end, we have talked about Python, JavaScript, .NET, right, and so on. Okay, now besides these two, what I've mentioned, and I've talked about this thing called databases as well. So databases, are what stores all the information. All right, and there's this thing called SQL, which is structured query language. Okay, and there is always some sort, right, of database that you can make use of it as well. So the difference here is you want to separate between traditional software, so the structured query language with SQL, right, or you want to go the NoSQL route as well, which is the NoSQL route. Okay, it can be a mix of both, right? And a lot of systems, right, can have both of them, right? SQL and non-SQL databases. Right, post that, right, you want to have this thing called DevOps. Okay, DevOps is really interesting, right? And I've not mentioned it because typically for people to walk the DevOps route, they would typically come in through the software engineering route first, right? Pick up either front end or back end, and then dive right into DevOps. So DevOps, what is it, right? In a nutshell, right, it is really for us to make sure we can have a solid way of making sure that when our system gets pushed into production, when our system gets pushed for people to make use of, right, we have a consistent way to maintain different versions. Okay, because if you notice, right, even your phone, right, tells you there's always some sort of update, right? Even your your website always changes. So DevOps, right, development operations, right, really help to make sure that the front end and back end are synchronized and the end users, right, have a seamless experience in using it, right? And finally, we have, right, our mobile application, right? So mobile app itself, right? So in mobile app dev, we all know, right, you're either holding an Android phone or, right, you are holding a Apple phone, right? So either one of these can, so you can pick up either one of them. So now, what type of person are you, right? You can either one of them, you can take up all of them, okay, or you can try all of them one by one, okay. But saying that this is the person, in terms of what you're interested in, but what about your character itself? Okay, so after understanding that there is so much things to do, right? Probably you want to ask yourself, am I really cut out, right, for software engineering? I would tell you one thing. A lot of people who think that they're not cut out, right? A lot of them, once you really try to understand and really try to pick it up, anything is possible. Okay, but there are some characteristics that would help. So now, what are they? Okay, so what are some of these characteristics that will help you as a person if you are trying to pick up software engineering, right? Could be if you are logical, right? If you're a logical person, right? You think things through, you think things in steps, right? Step by step. First, you want to do step A, then do step B, then do step C, and so on and so forth, right? So if you're logical in nature, definitely, right, this will be very helpful for you. What if you are a deep thinker? Great, right? Deep thinker is very important as well. So I'll draw your attention back, right, to when we saw that guy had to spend 10 hours, right, automating a 10 minutes task, right? So obviously you will have to spend 10 hours of making sure that, you think it through, right, to be able to see what are the steps, and how do I overcome problems, right, within the steps itself. So you could be a deep thinker like that. So what if you are just curious about tech? Great, right? That is step one. Okay, you have to be curious about tech. If you're not curious, right, it's very difficult, right, for you to get started, right? You could just be, the person who is just thinking that, okay, it's a phone, I need to connect to the internet, right? I'm able to go to Google, right? End of story. Right? But if you're thinking a little more, hey, how does tech work, right? How does the entire thing piece together? What are the puzzles that's required, right? And you want to dive a little bit deeper, right, to understand tech. Then that is when you are on a good starting point. And obviously, you will be someone who likes to solve problems, right? So if you like to solve problems, great, well and good. Okay, then anyone will always come to you and say, hey, help me solve my problem. Okay, hey, my internet is not working. Hey, my system is shutting down. Okay, it can't start up, right? So probably, right, for all of us, you would have encountered this in your life, right? It could be with your parents, it could be with your spouse, right? It could be, with your children itself or your colleagues, right? Who say, my PC isn't working, right? Can you help me solve it? Right? Say just hit restart. Okay, you may say that. Okay, but typically, right, you want to help them solve the problem. Great. So hopefully you do have this kind of character as well. So now, when we talk about preparing yourself, okay, for learning, right? When we pick up some of the programming languages, you will always want to focus on the fundamentals itself, right? Focusing on the fundamentals, right, is very important. Okay, now, a lot of people get lost when they try to pick up software engineering, merely for the fact that software engineering is a huge dump, right? Huge data dump, right, on a person, right? It's almost as if when I tell you something and I'm trying to teach you something, right, all you get, right, is a deluge of information itself. Okay, so you always want to focus on the fundamentals, and you always want to understand, right, how do things work, right? The moment you're doing that, okay, you will be winning already. Okay, so you want to focus on the fundamentals. And when we talk about learning about software engineering, okay, it's always better, right, to study and learn in groups itself. Okay, ask your friends, hey, how do you solve this problem? Hey, how do I do that? Okay, what does this mean, right? But here I'll add on one more thing. Not just ask people, teach others as well. When you are doing software engineering and you teach other people, what does it mean, for a specific part of it? It could be loops, right? It could be algorithms. Right? So long as you are teaching someone, you are learning yourself. Okay, that is an important thing, right, for software engineering, because some of these things can be quite complicated, right? And it could be a little bit difficult to understand, right, at first glance. Okay, first glance. The first time you see it, right, it could be difficult for people to understand. And I'll always suggest this: study in moderation, right? Pace yourself. Right? If you are studying and you're trying to accomplish 10 topics all at once, you will probably not remember topic number 1 by the time you hit topic number 5. Okay, because in software engineering, right, there is a lot of topics, and I mentioned to you it is a big data dump of information itself. Okay, and another thing to note, right, practice, practice, practice. Okay, software engineering is extremely hands-on. It's extremely something that you would learn more, right, when you practice more, where you get your hands in, type out the code, right, get understanding of the code. I mean, you can Google, there are a lot of codes online, but if you're copying and pasting code, right, you are not learning itself. Okay, I always tell people, yes, you can go ahead and copy and take codes from online. You can always ask, right, someone about coding itself. You can always ask, even now, ChatGPT, right, about coding. Okay, but right, it does not mean that you know how to code. Okay, so what does it mean for me to say that you know how to code? Right, it is practice, 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 practice. All right, and the next thing is take a break. All right, take a break is very important. Right, because if you are not taking a break and you're just going at coding, right, if you are learning it, you're going to burn out. You're going to burn out fast, right, really fast. I've experienced it myself when I try to take up, understand new topics, right, and I try to go fast. The moment I try to do that, okay, I'll just burn out and not understand anything. You just hit a mental mind block. All right, and another tip, right, I'll share to everyone, right, given that you are trying to pick up software engineering, would be to read documentation. Okay, I always tell people, read documentation. So what does it mean to say to read documentation? I'll give an example. Right, if right a brand new washing machine, right, or a brand new something, a toaster oven, a washing machine, right, comes into your house, right, if you notice, the washing machines are going to be filled, right, with a lot of little icons, right, like these icons that you see on your screen, and you will not understand what some of these icons are. So now you're going to go, oh no, do I just push everything? Right, let's just go ahead and try. Oh, I think this is a wash. No, I think that is dry. No, I think that is just spin. Okay. So now you wouldn't know, would you? So what would you do? Either you call the person who has brought the washing machine for you here, no, or right, what do? You read documentation. You try to understand, what are the little functions there are on the washing machine itself. It is the same thing, right, with software engineering. Okay, whenever you do pick up something, there's always going to be documentation, right, in software engineering. If there isn't, right, and you can't find software documentation in software engineering, please do not use that. Okay, then that's just wasting your time. Okay, and it's a good practice, right? A lot for software engineers, we would always create documentation for the codes that we write, right, so that the next person will be able to understand, okay, what we have created. All right. Okay, so this is something that I will encourage you, right, as a tip, right, the pro tip to do. Okay, so this is how you prepare yourself, right, and when you're learning, right, these are some of things that you would want to pick up, right, and do as well. Okay, so now what can you do, right, after you have learned, right, software engineering? Okay, you must ask, right? This is a very important question, okay? Because wow, after going through all the hard work of trying to pick it up, what else can I do with it, right? And do I just leave it alone? Do I just not do anything with it, right? You would definitely want to as well, isn't it? Okay, so what can you do? So the first thing is you want to understand that there are career opportunities, right, out there, right? If you are good, so what does it mean by good? Practice, okay? So if you are good, right, you can work for large organizations as well. So what some of these large organizations, you probably know, is they are Alphabet, which is now Google, which was Google, now it's Alphabet. You have Amazon, you have Apple, you have Meta, which was Facebook, and then you have Microsoft as well. So there are many others. So you should see in this little background, you'll see you have Netflix, Nvidia, Tesla, Baidu, Xiaomi, Uber, Twitter, Tencent, and more. Okay, so these career opportunities are going to be there. Okay, but that is saying, all right, this is an opportunity. Okay, you may not always land up with these companies, but there are many companies out there, right, which would do software engineering. Okay, so now what else can you do? You can create your own startup, right? You can create your own company, right? Software engineering skills, okay, can be used, right, for entrepreneurs, right, startup founders, right, to be able to create and launch their own tech-based businesses, okay, to build their own moonshot, okay, to build their own moonshot companies, all the trial ideas, okay. So you want to aim, right, for the moon, okay. So a lot of these companies always start, okay, from small first. Okay, you will have high earning potential. Okay, so just to give you an example over here, in the United States, right, software developers, QA, analysts, and testers. Okay, so there is a wide variety of jobs that you can pick up, right, after learning software engineering. It is not just only to be a software developer, right? It can be QA, it can be a software tester as well. Okay, now obviously for all of this, there's a range, right? So in the US, okay, so typically the software developers would pick up almost $110,000, right, a year, right, for them, to at least a take home, right, for them to earn. Okay, so it's the medium annual wages, right, in 2020. Okay, so there's always a trend, right? So software engineers, right, have been trending up, right, in terms of their salary itself. Okay, so you have a high earning potential, and it's one of the highest paying professions, right? Some would say, right, if you're really good, right, you can even earn better than being a lawyer or being a doctor itself. Now, one can argue that lawyers and doctors and software engineers should not be on the same page, right? But it is what it is right now. The market, right, prizes software engineering skills very highly, right? If you do pick it up, you do have a good ways to go. What about flexibility, right, and work-life balance? So with recent trends, right, software engineering, you will notice one thing. You're going to be sitting in front of your computer, right, and you are going to be using it, right, to work on software engineering tasks, right? So there's a high degree of flexibility. What you really need is just a laptop, internet, right, and you'll be able to work from anywhere. So you can be on site, right, within office itself, face to face. Right now, post COVID, right, we have people working remotely, right? You can be working anywhere in the world. So there has been this phenomenon of software engineers, right, going away from offices itself. Now, unless you're Elon Musk, right, which has been calling people back to office, right, a lot of companies have been trending towards people working off-site. Okay, so working remotely, right, and you can potentially even work freelance. So now, freelance always carries with it a lot of flexibility because you are technically your own boss, right, and with your skill set can help out, right, people to learn just about any company, right, just about to create anything you want. Okay, so this helps you to lead to a better work-life balance itself. All right. So next, okay, learning, right, and personal growth. Software engineering, unfortunately, right, for software engineering, personal development is almost every day. Okay, almost every day. Some would tell you to say that, hey, what certifications, right, you need to pick up, after you become a software engineer, right? What things, do you have to attain to really get yourself this badge, right, of, say yes, a certified software engineer. There isn't much to say, right, on that, right, in terms of certifications, right? Mainly really because new things are always coming. There is always something new on the horizon. There is always opportunity for you to grow, right, and to learn. Okay, so yeah, okay, growing and learning as a software engineer is a constant. It's a constant. Okay, so now, how do you learn? Where do you learn? Right? So now, if you're just beginning, you're just starting out, okay, you want to always ask yourself, okay, what are some of these resources, right, and places that I can pick up, right, software engineering? Okay, they are online courses. Okay, they are online courses, right? They are coding bootcamps, right? Or they are the traditional degree programs itself. So, depending on what stage you are in life, and depending on your financial capability, all right, you may start to think which of these helps and suits you better. Okay, not all of these, right, would suit everyone. Okay, so which one suits you? You're gonna ask yourself this question, okay, because all of this come with different levels of time commitment. Okay, time commitment. Okay, so that is something you got to kind of ask yourself. You can definitely ask me. I can give you a little more examples and answers itself. Okay, now next, okay, what are some of the real world applications? Okay, so a lot of these apps, right, have changed the world. These few that you see on your screen, right, Uber, Google Maps, Airbnb, right, some of these applications have changed the world. I remember when I was just a little bit younger, my dad or mom, when traveling, would always bring, right, a physical map, right, to figure out where we are going. Nowadays, you just need a mobile phone, right? You don't really need a map anymore. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Okay, so applications and software development, software engineering really have capability, right, to change the world. Okay, so these are real world applications that probably everyone would have seen. Now, what about those applications that you don't really see? So there are quite a lot of applications that you don't really see, things such as SAP, Oracle NetSuite, right, Acumatica, right, Biz Automation, right? Those are some of the back end, right, for MNCs, multinational corporations that we don't see, right? And typically, they would have huge impact on those organizations as well. Okay, so this is a mix, right, of what we see as end users and what we don't see, right, as organizations would see. Okay, so there are many pathways for you to pick up software engineering. Okay, and these are the few pathways, right? And there's formal education, self-study, apprenticeship. Okay, success, right, is not one straight road, right, as depicted in this picture that you see as well. Okay, a lot of people, right, play with software engineering for a while and they leave and they come back, okay, or they just exit it altogether after picking it up, right? It's not for everyone, but it is for you, right? If it's for you, okay, software engineering, right, may not be a straight road, right? Especially if you have finished, right, your college degree, right, or university degree, right? If you finished it, okay, going back to college could be tough, right? So what other ways? Self-study is one way, but I always tell people, self-study, yes, is really good, but do you have the determination, right? Do you have the grit, right, to accomplish, right, self-study, right? Or typically you want to pick up some sort of educational boot camp, right? Formal education, right? Could be degree, right? Or boot camp itself. So boot camp, with everyone learning different parts in life, trying to figure it out and understand. Yes, I think that could be one way for you as well. Okay, through apprenticeships. Now, apprenticeship will be a little bit difficult because they always expect a certain level of understanding before you can come in. Okay, but yes, right, there is different paths of success, right, software engineering. Okay, now post that, okay, you want to understand a few more things. Okay, what is the role of soft skills? Okay, so soft skills are very important as well. Okay, we want you to be able to pick them up. Okay, and what are they like? They are things such as communication, collaboration, and problem solving. Okay, here's the thing. The idea here is when you are doing software engineering, okay, it is not straightforward. Okay, you can, if you are really super, finish entire application by yourself, but most of the time, software engineers work in teams. Okay, and when they do work in teams, there's a lot of communication that's required to talk to each other, to try to figure out, what is the best solution, right, to a problem itself, to collaborate and say, hey, maybe you work on part A and I work on part B, right? All of us can have a totality, right, end of the day together, combine our work. Okay, so soft skills is very important as well. Obviously, problem solving. Okay, so all these are important, right, for software engineering. So in terms of software engineering itself, we do have a few more things. Okay, what are some of the challenges and obstacles in software engineering? Okay, I would say one thing. It's going to be a little bit hard for people without programming background. Okay, but with guidance, right, and with a little of grit, right, 100% you can pick it up. Not lying, all right? And there are many tools in the market. Okay, what tools are important? You don't really know. Okay, but today I've kind of showed you, right? Well, a little bit, just a little bit glimpse of what some of the tools, right, and languages which are important, right, in terms of the frameworks itself. Okay, so for people starting out, right, not attending this class of mine, right, you'll be figuring out, oh no, what do I do? There's so many things. Okay, but if you typically you have to ask someone, for you to get a better answer. Okay, and there are too many courses to choose from as well online. Okay, not everything, right, is good. Okay, so now, what are some of the challenges, right, and how do you overcome them? Okay, you typically would like to start with a simple programming language. Okay, and you will want to try to find out, right, what are some of the tools there are. Again, we want to talk about popularity of tools. Okay, you want to see the reviews, right, and what the content of the courses before you decide, right, your mode of learning itself. Okay, software engineering, right, is likely to evolve, right, into the future as well. Okay, and I would say, how can you stay ahead of the curve, right? How do you, always be at the forefront of software engineering? So number one, understand the terminology. So what does it mean to understand terminology? Understanding the basics is very important, right? Understanding how things work, right, is very important as well. And post that, you understand that our world, right, is very complex, right? SE, right, or software engineering, is just trying to model our world, or trying to make, our applications work in this complex world that we do have. Okay, and not everything is about creating, right? It's also about defending your creations as well. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so you have to learn that there are attackers out there trying to break your system, trying to break your application. So some of these things we would have to learn as well. Okay, and obviously some of the challenges, right, in learning software engineering, and how can you pick it up? Obviously, some math is involved as well potentially. Okay, so building for the future. Okay, so I've talked to you a little bit more about websites. I talked to you a little bit more on cars, apps, right, and so on. Okay, now what could be, right, building for the future? How picking up software engineering could help, right, in future technologies as well. So for future technologies, right, of tomorrow, okay, we have things such as VR, AR, and mixed reality. A lot of people would tell you, hey, VR and AR has been around since 2016. What's the deal, right? That isn't exactly new, isn't it? Okay, but here, is everyone using it, right? Is everyone having smart reality, augmented reality? Right? Not true, right? Not everyone has it. Software engineering, right, is still working out, right? Some of the kinks, right, in some of this, and some of the problems with them. But you can participate in some of this if you are really interested. What about this thing called pervasive AI? So AI, right, is now really pervasive, and everyone is making use of it. But software engineering, right, really is one of those things that help AI come into real existence, right? Using it on your mobile phone, using it on your laptop, using it on your PC, right? Software engineering helps bring this to life itself. Biotechnology, right? So in terms of biotechnology, right, you need certain interfaces for us to check whether some of these new vaccines, right, some of these new novel, right, medicines work, right? So biotechnology, right, and this thing called BCI, right, brain-computer interface. So our brains have always been trying to talk to the computer, and the medium has always been using a laptop and us typing, us talking, right? What if we can just directly use our brain and just think about it, right? And we can then communicate with the PC itself. Okay, so the brain-computer interface. Okay, so some level of software engineering skills are all needed. So in conclusion, so why you should take up software engineering? Okay, so it is challenging to learn. Okay, if you like a challenge, right, please take it up. Number two, it is not a sunset industry. It's not a sunset industry. A lot of people are joining. Okay, I just said a lot of people joining it, but actually the truth is a lot of people are joining it, but there isn't enough people joining. Okay, that is the truth. Okay, so I would love for you to join. All right, and there's good remuneration rates, as I mentioned to you, okay, and you have the ability, right, to build your dreams. All right. So in conclusion, right, so I want you, right, to be a techie. Okay, so this is the call for people to join. Okay, and I think that's it from me. Okay, I think we are reaching the end. So thank you for listening. Right, I think we'll now take some questions. Adi, over to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Desmond. I think that was a very, very interesting 45 minutes, and I personally learned a lot myself, understanding how the software industry is flowing today. I'm sure a lot of you in the audience who are listening in, watching in on Zoom and the live streams would have some questions that you would like to ask our speakers. So please go ahead and shoot your questions. We'll spend about 10 minutes. I know we're going to overrun a little bit, but we'll spend about 10 minutes answering your questions. So, please put them up on the chat, and, we'll take them one at a time. All right, so I think we have a question for Mr. Desmond here from Manuel. So the question says, how is AI going to affect software engineering? I think that's a very interesting question. What's your take on that?
Yes, okay, thank you for this question. So how is AI going to affect software engineering? So in the short to medium term, I would say that AI right now is a very good assistant, right, in creation of software engineering systems, right, and any projects that you may have. Because problems that are well known, okay, people would have asked a lot of questions about these problems. Okay, AI would definitely be able to help out, right, in this short to medium term. But in the long term, the issue with AI right now is that it's not able to come up with new things, right? New things that it has not encountered before. So with AI, the limitation is you're not able to come up with new things. And the thing is, humans, right, always come out with new things, right? If you notice, we had a lot of different frameworks that I mentioned a little bit more about. Okay, and there are so many different languages, correct? So AI, yes, they can come up with languages, but typically when they're generating something new, when they're generating something that's out of this world, out of this box, right? It's going to be tough, okay, for AI. So AI is a very good assistant, right? And I will still encourage you to pick up, right, software engineering, even though there is AI right now. All right.
Great. Hopefully, Emmanuel, you've got an answer to your question. So AI is definitely a helpful aid, but for sure it is probably not up to the level yet where it can completely replace all the developers that are required for an application. We have another question that's coming in from Anne Marielle. Very interesting question. It says, when is the code first approach used and the API first design used? Is there an industry best practice?
Hey, so thank you for this question. And so now, code first approach, right, is, to be honest, a little bit more old school. Okay, and we actually have gone past, right, code first approach. You don't really want to code first and then figure out what is happening, right? You want to create APIs first. Okay, and the idea here is this. Okay, now with business requirements laid out, okay, and we are creating these documentations, right? You want to make use of API first rather than the code first. So we want to move past, right, traditional approach. Okay, so right now industry has been trending, right, toward API first. Okay, so typically we'll just do that. All right, that is the answer. All right.
Thank you. And hopefully, you've gotten an answer that the API first approach is more scalable today as opposed to the other. So hopefully you're satisfied with the answer. Let's invite a few more questions. We'll spend another 5 minutes. If you have any more questions, either on Zoom or the live stream, please post in your questions and we can get them answered here.
So actually, I do have a direct message from Victor, right, so Victor Palmer, who asked me the question: what is the difference between web developer, right, and software engineer. So they are almost interchangeable terms, okay? And you would have heard me say that these different terms, okay, differently, right? And we have made, they're almost interchangeable, okay? So now, they are very blurred, right, in terms of their job, okay, and they are almost similar. But the long-term outlook, right, in terms of what it means for either one of them, right, is the same, okay? So to be honest, when we talk about what is a web developer, you are typically someone who is maintaining websites, okay, and you may not dive deep, right, into engineering and creating some of the deep per se background or back end itself. Okay, but software engineers, right, do help doing things such as technical documentation, doing performance and monitoring and so on. So the lines are really blurred, just very minor differences within both of them. Okay, but if someone says, "Hey, I'm looking for a web developer," and you're a software engineer, please go and apply. Right? If someone says they're looking for a software engineer, right, and you're a web developer, okay, either one, okay, you can apply for either one of those jobs.
Right. Thank you so much for the answer. Again, I think we'll spend a couple of more minutes. If you have any questions, please put them up on the chat. We'll be very happy to answer them. I think one of the questions that I personally had as well, and a lot probably people in the audience would also want to know. This is from the perspective of when career switchers or people who are pursuing software engineering as a new career path switch into a new role. What do you think employers and are looking for in terms of software engineering? What kind of qualities and traits are they looking at?
Okay, so if I'm an employer and I am looking right for someone who is a software engineer, I'll be typically looking at whether the person is able to think logically, right? First, okay, in terms of personality, right, and is very good at problem solving. Okay, if they are someone who is very good at problem solving, I think they have a good capability to become a software engineer. So this question that you have mentioned actually ties in the question that's being asked by Gary, right, who asked me this question: can an individual without an IT experience and background become a software engineer? The answer is yes, right? Yes, you can, right? Now, the traditional pathway, right, would be for someone to take up a engineering degree, right, or a computer science degree. Now, if I were to take up that pathway, right, and then go join industry, it's going to be a longer time. Okay, but if you don't have IT experience, okay, and like what I mentioned to Aditya, right, if you have some level, right, of logical thinking, right, some level of making sure that you want to solve problems, right, in a logical way, okay, then you definitely will be potentially fit for being a software engineer.
Great, thank you for the answer. I think along the same lines, Leonid Estrella has a question which says, what's the ideal age bracket for software engineers that is valuable to the industry right now?
I will tell you one thing. Thank you for this question, Leonid. There is no ideal age bracket. There is no ideal age bracket. There is probably a ideal type of person, okay, but there's no ideal age bracket. I have seen people who are age 50, right, age 60, right, trying to pick up software engineering, okay, and they pick it up pretty successfully as well. So there isn't really an ideal age bracket, but you would consider these people as mid-career switchers, correct? Now, for these people, yeah, so long as you have the grit, the determination, right, and you have attended some sort of background, right? I mean, we mentioned that you could pick it up either self-study, right, or you attend some boot camp or having a degree. Okay, so these are different ways. Okay, so you can switch into software engineering, and there is no ideal age bracket. Okay?
I mean that's heartening to hear, because I think everybody, irrespective of their age today, can learn, and they're accepted into the industry as well. So people like career switchers especially get along with them a lot of experience from the industry. So that would, I believe, help them when they go to a new industry. We'll take the last couple of questions that have come in, and then we will call it a day. But one of the questions says, is there a future in software engineering for career shifters? I think this is along the lines of what you mentioned earlier. But could you just very quickly pinpoint to that answer?
Yes, right, for sure. Typically, when you are a career shifter and you start off new in software engineering, you may suffer a little bit of a downgrade, right, in terms of your pay package, right? Say, for example, you're coming in from a higher pay scale, right? But if you're doing career shifting, right, you may drop in terms of your career package just a little bit, right? Payment package just a little bit, okay, for the beginning. Okay, but right, for software engineering, that's the thing, okay. The salaries, right, increments are pretty good, right, across time. Okay, so there is always going to be a future, okay, for that. Okay, that's my answer for you.
So in short, the answer is yes, there is a future. So, if you are looking to get into that, then, don't think twice. I think the last question, Mr. Desmond, that we'll take is, from Emmanuel again. He says, I'm a beginner in programming, and there are many programming languages and frameworks out there. Does one need to learn all of them, or just the newest languages and frameworks, or probably those that are required by the industry?
All right, thank you, Emmanuel, for this question. Yes, great. Welcome to software engineering. Great that you're a beginner, and great that you're learning. Now, do you need to learn all of it? The answer is no. Okay, the answer is no. Okay, and do you just need to learn the newest language? The answer is no as well. Okay, my suggestion is not to pick up the newest language, but to pick up the ones which are most popular. Now, it could be 10 years already, right? That is very popular, but if it's still most popular, right, please pick that up. Okay, don't pick the one that has nobody learning, right, or has nobody trying to figure out why it's useful. Okay, so the main reason is this. Okay, because for programming languages, right, even frameworks, there's always going to be a community of people supporting it, right? Community of people whom are using it and consistently updating the language and framework itself, right? To make sure that it is up with the times, right? And it could be cybersecurity attacks, right? It could be compliance with governments, right? It could be world ISO standards. Okay, so typically these programming languages, right, would require some of these things, right? Even with AI coming in, how can we adapt, right? Some of these software engineering infrastructures, right? Frameworks, right, to make sure that we can absorb, right, and make use of this AI itself. Okay, in terms of making sure that from not just a model, right, but it gets to the hands of people, right, who are able to make use of it, right? It could be simple things such as a interface itself. Okay, so typically the most popular ones are going to have a lot of people supporting it. Okay, so that is the answer for you.
Thank you so much for the answer. And I think to summarize, learn the things that are required by the industry. And I think one of the things that Desmond also mentioned earlier, that things change, right? There are new things that keep coming. You need to keep yourself updated, but you do not need to learn all of it, right? You could choose to specialize. Once again, thank you so much, Mr. Desmond, for your presence. I think it was an amazing event and talk, and I think a lot of people learned from you as well today. And thank you to everybody who joined us on Zoom and our live stream channels. And hopefully you learned something from this. Hopefully we got your questions answered. And if you feel like watching it again, you could go to our LinkedIn page, our Facebook page, and you could rewatch the live streams there as well. Thank you everybody for attending the session this evening. Have a wonderful rest of the evening or rest of the day. And we encourage you to go down the software engineering path. And if you choose to do so, don't hesitate. Thank you very much and have a very good evening. Bye-bye.